Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. My name is Maddie and today I'm going to be giving you my October wrap-up. These are all of the books or things, graphic novels, etc. that I read in October. I read 3 comics, 1 novella, and then 9 books, 3 of which were rereads. The first book I read in October was Avatar: The Last Airbender in Balance Part 3. This is a part of the Avatar comic collection, and this is In Balance, which is one of the later stories within the collection, but I didn't know that at the time. So a few months ago I read books 1 and 2, and then this third one was just released. So now I have officially read the latest stories in the Avatar comics, but I haven't read anything in between. Because also this month I read The Promise Parts 2 and 3, and The Promise is the first series, the first story in the Avatar comic books. So I have officially finished the first and the last stories because I decided to buy books before researching and screwed myself up on the timeline basically, but they were still really good. I enjoyed all of these comics. I really did like The Promise better. However, I still really liked In Balance. I was kind of lost a little bit at what was going on in the world, but it's fine. I still don't know how I want to rate comics and graphic novels because it's still a pretty new world to me, but I really liked them. You can never go wrong with Avatar: The Last Airbender, honestly. Next, I read The Thing with Feathers by McCall Hoyle. And this is a YA contemporary story following a teenage girl named Emily who has epilepsy, and she is starting public school for the first time, and she decides that it's best she doesn't tell anyone about her epilepsy because she doesn't want people to see her differently. And while it is about physical health and mental health, it is primarily a romance. She actually meets this boy at school named Chatham, and he's the popular kid at school, and all of his friends are kind of confused as to why he's giving this new girl attention, but you know, things start to happen between them and it's really cute. This book wasn't perfect by any means, but I still really did like it, and I gave it 4.5 out of 5 stars, which means it got a 5-star from me on Goodreads. Next, I read In a Dark, Dark Wood by Ruth Ware. This is an adult mystery thriller novel. One of my favorite books that I read this year was The Woman in Cabin 10 by Ruth Ware, so I've been trying to make my way through all of her books, and I have not been disappointed so far. I really liked In a Dark, Dark Wood. This book follows a woman named Nora who 10 years ago just up and left her life, and she left all of her friends, all of her relationships behind, and she hasn't really talked to anyone since then. However, in the beginning of the novel, she gets an invitation to attend her past best friend's wedding bachelorette party. It's called a hen party in the book, but I'm assuming that that's not an American term because I've never heard of it before. But from what I gathered while reading it, it's basically our American equivalent of a bachelorette party. And this party is in the middle of the woods, the middle of nowhere, and for some reason the main character decides to go and figure out why her long-lost best friend, who she hasn't talked to in 10 years, invited her to this party. However, going to this hen party means the main character must face some of the people that she left behind, and she also meets some new friends as well. But some mysterious things start happening at this cabin in the middle of the woods on this weekend where, you know, everyone is supposed to stay away. No one's supposed to come to this cabin because it's like the bachelorette party. The groom's not supposed to be there. No one else is supposed to be there. So they are alone with no cell phone service, and some mysterious things start happening. I don't want to tell you more about what happens in the story and more about the mystery. However, I will say that this book is actually mostly told from the future. The main character is looking back on what happened in the past and telling you the story, because in present day she is actually in the hospital with amnesia and she's pretty bad hurt, so you know that something bad must have happened at that cabin, but she doesn't remember. So throughout the book she's relaying her memories as they come to her, so you as the reader find out what happened when the main character actually remembers it herself. I found this really interesting and I really liked the story. However, I will say it was kind of predictable, but that could just be me. I gave this book 4 out of 5 stars. Next, I read I Miss You When I Blink, Essays by Mariette Laura Philpott. Sorry, I had to look at my phone to remember that author's name. So this is actually a nonfiction book, and it's a collection of essays. Essentially, this author spent her whole life trying to check off boxes of things she wanted to do and who she wanted to be, but then after she accomplished all of her goals, she realized that she didn't actually like herself and she wasn't who she wanted to be. So she went through a process, a journey of finding herself. If you feel in a similar situation to this author, then I definitely recommend this book. And if you like nonfiction, then I recommend this book to you as well. I gave it 4 out of 5 stars. Next, I read an outrageously long book. I read The Way of Shadows by Brent Weeks, and this is the first book in the Night Angel series. And this is an adult fantasy series about an assassin, and I really loved the assassin element. That's the reason why I chose to read this book. Also, I've heard some really good things about Brent Weeks. However, I had never heard of this particular series before for some reason, but it was available from my library, so I decided to read it, and I liked it. I enjoyed it, but it was so long, and I don't want to say that the information wasn't essential to the plot line, because everything does come into play later on in the book, but this book follows the main character from the time he was a little kid till he's like in his mid-20s, and he's a full-on assassin. In the beginning of the book, when you're just following him as a kid, I mean, I was thinking the whole time, what's the point of this? What's the point of telling me this? Because it just didn't seem like it was important at the time. But in order for you to understand the actual story and what happens later on in the book, you have to know who he is and what his past was. I just feel like it could have been condensed in some type of way. The beginning of this book just wasn't that interesting for me. It wasn't necessarily boring, I just wasn't excited to pick it up and read it. It was just alright at the beginning, but I did like the overarching story, and I really liked the ending. It was fast-paced, there was a lot of action, and of course, I love reading books about assassins. It just fascinates me for some reason. So I did end up enjoying this book. I just felt like it was way too long. And I gave it 4 stars. Next, I read a novella. I read The Moth and the Flame by Renee Ahdieh. This is a prequel novella to the Wrath and the Dawn duology, which is one of my favorites, and it follows the characters Despina and Jalal. Knowing what I know about these 2 characters after I've read the duology a bunch of times, I think I enjoyed the story a lot more than I would have if I had read it before reading book 2. So if you're planning on reading this novella, I definitely recommend reading it after you finish the duology. Next, I read another really long book. I read The Host by Stephenie Meyer. This is a YA sci-fi, and I'm sure you all have heard of Stephenie Meyer, who wrote the Twilight Saga. And while Twilight does have its standums, most people actually really enjoy and prefer The Host. So I've been very curious as to what I would think of this book, because it's been so long since I read Twilight, and Twilight is the series that got me into reading YA when I was a teenager. And I've been curious to know what I would think of Stephenie Meyer's writing now that I'm much more experienced in reading YA. I did not think this book was bad. It was too long. It probably could have been shortened a lot. And yes, it's problematic. There's a ton of different issues with the relationships in this book that just, I just had to look past them, honestly, but I still enjoyed the story, and I didn't think it was that bad. I didn't think it was bad at all, actually. Would I say it was great? No. But as far as my enjoyment of the story, I gave it 4.5 out of 5 stars. And next, I did some rereads. I read Heir of Fire and Queen of Shadows by Sarah J Maas, books 3 and 4 in the Throne of Glass series, which is my favorite series of all time. I'm constantly wanting to reread this series, honestly. Like, even after rereading it, I still want to read it again. My desire to be with these characters just never ends. Anyway, I felt myself going into a reading slump, and I knew that reading Throne of Glass would get me out of that. So, I read Heir of Fire, which is my favorite book in the series, I think, and I read it, I loved it, and I had to continue on with the story, so I read Queen of Shadows. And I said last year when Kingdom of Ash came out that I was going to reread it, and I never did. I was planning on just rereading it at a slow pace whenever I felt like it, and I never ended up picking that book back up again to reread it. So, since I'm already on a reread of the later books in the series, I might as well just continue on, and I think I'm going to read Empire of Storms, skip Tower of Dawn, and then read Kingdom of Ash. I love these books. Y'all know I love these books. Next, I reread Skullduggery Pleasant by Derek Landy. This is a middle grade turned YA series. It is not like Harry Potter at all as far as the characters and the plot go, but it does have a very similar feel to Harry Potter. I have only read the first book, but I want to continue on with the series, which is why I reread this first book, you know, because I didn't remember anything hardly that happened in the first book because I read it when I was like 16. So I had to refresh my memory, and now I plan to continue on with the rest of the series. But as far as I know, the first books start out as middle grade, very much like Harry Potter, and as the series expands, it turns more into a YA series. The first book starts out with the main character Stephanie being 11 years old, and her uncle has just passed away and left his entire fortune basically to his 11-year-old niece. But right after his passing, there are several different people that she's never met before and different magical creatures that show up and attack her, and they are looking for the special key that has something to do with this hidden magical artifact. So she is thrust into a world of magic that she didn't know existed, and a man known as Skullduggery Pleasant comes to her rescue and saves her, and together they go on an adventure on an investigation as to what her uncle was all wrapped up in, and why are there people chasing her, what are they after, what do they want, and what do they want with Stephanie. And an interesting aspect about this story is Skullduggery is actually a skeleton. He was killed and was somehow brought back to life as a skeleton, and it's really fun, it's really interesting, and I had a fun time reading this book again. And lastly, I finally finished Midnight Sun by Trish Cook. This is a book that I started several months ago, and I've just been reading it at a slow pace. Whenever I had nothing else to read and I didn't feel like reading anything else, I just would pick up this book, read a chapter or two, and set it down until I felt like reading again. Because this book is so bad, it made me realize how much I wanted to read the other books on my TBR. And that's kind of why it took me so long to read this book. While it is really bad, the writing isn't good, the dialogue is terrible, and it's very problematic and cheesy. I still enjoyed the story. I much prefer and recommend the movie though, but even the movie's not that great. For people with XP, even a small amount of sun exposure can kill them because they are highly susceptible to skin cancers, and in a lot of cases their brain basically starts shutting down and they have a lot of loss of function. So the main character Katie is only allowed to go outside of her house at night. She's always been homeschooled and been shut up in her house for most of her life, but now that she is a teenager going into an adult, she is allowed to explore and go out on her own, just within a heavy set of rules, because if she stays out too late and is exposed to any type of sun, she will die. However, ever since she was a little girl, she watched this one guy from her window go back and forth to school every morning, and she is in love with him even though she's never met him. However, one night when she's out exploring life on her own, she actually runs into this guy and she actually gets to meet him, and they become friends, and then a romance ensues. It's cute, but very cheesy, not well written at all, and somewhat problematic. There's one point in this book that I just had to set it down because I was so mad at something one of the characters said, and I'm gonna read it for you because it's, oh my gosh, it's so bad. So the male love interest dad is actually talking with Katie's dad. And he says, "I just wanted to tell you how happy I am our kids found each other. There are a few people or moments in a person's life that changes our story. She'll leave her mark on him forever, and him on her, even though it's not meant to last. As I told Charlie, all you can do is be grateful for the experience and be grateful she came into your life." For enjoyment, I gave it 3 stars, but if I'm looking at it from a critical standpoint, it's more of a 2-star book. Alright, those are all the books, comics, and novellas that I read in the month of October. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel if you want to see more bookish content by me. Let me know in the comments down below what your favorite book that you read in October was. I hope you all have a wonderful day, and I will see you in my next video. Bye.